Mem Daled, and we pick up Mem Gimel Amid Bet, and we pick up with the two dots. Pamachas lo nichnesu in Amel. So we're still dealing with being on a boat, and you land, and once you land, if you went from Chutz L'Tchum, because you are now 2,000 amot outside of where the boat was when Shabbos began, then you can only have four amot from where you are. So I'll go back and review some of the halacha l'maisa aspects that we discussed about that yesterday, about whether you have the enclosed space that you enter into, and whether you have tchumim above 2,000 amot above 10 tfachim off the ground. But the Gemara anyway looks at the Mishnah, assuming that all those are a problem. And in the case of the Mishnah, could they get off of the boat? Could they deplane is disembark. Thank you. Anyway, so Rabbi Gamliel said, "Oh no, I was looking as we were getting close, and I saw that we were within 2,000 amot when Shabbos began. They can't necessarily walk home, but they can get off they can disembark, get off the boat. So let's take a look at the Gemara. What?
You can't hold from that opinion.
All right, so yeah, it would have to be, it's a good question about exactly where you were. You'd have to say from the beginning of Bein Hashmashot. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Tana, so Pamachas lo nichnesu lamel, they didn't get into the port until after Shabbos. Tana, so now we turn to Brisa to explain exactly what happened. Shvoferes haisalo Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel had a tube. I'll discuss. Well, it sounds like a telescope. Yes. He would look through it and be able to determine 2,000 amot on dry land. And therefore, he was able to correspond to 2,000 amot on the sea and see whether it was in 2,000 amot or not. Now, how do you do that with a telescope? So Rashi says that this telescope, Rashi says it's not exactly a telescope, it's not for seeing long distances. Rashi actually says that actually foreshortens the distance that you can see, that apparently it has a smaller aperture at the end, and therefore, this is Rashi, before you jump on me, I know the problems with it, therefore, it limits how far you can see. So basically you either collapse it or extend it to open or close the opening at the end, and then when it's to a point where you can only see 2,000 amot, and you figure that out by measuring, then you know that wherever you can see by looking through this is 2,000 amot distance. So you measure on the land, and then you're able to use it even on the sea and say if I can see something, it means it's within 2,000 amot. The, of course, problem with this is that even if you have a small opening, it doesn't limit the length of the distance that you can see. It limits your field of vision, but it doesn't limit the length of the vision you can see. So it's very hard to understand from Rashi how this worked. I looked at Steinsaltz, and he quoted the Gaonim and others that say that it was not something for that it was basically, what are those things called that they have gradations and sextant or something? No, what is that? No, a sextant is a shamash in the show. What? What does he say there? What does he have in that picture? He's got a picture of the United English. Anyway, so he says that it's actual type of a thing that based on the angle and that you use it with using some type of math which I don't understand. Anyway, he says that you can use it to estimate distances, and that's actually what they use to even nowadays in surveying. Don't people see them sometimes looking at tripods and the angles and some type of a thing? I don't think it's not going to have it in here.
This would be Medita's bar mitzvah.
What? Medita? Well, he was doing it on Erev Shabbos.
Does anyone suggest that maybe it's like the focal length is such that you can see a certain point? It's like it's focused for a point 2,000.
Oh, so that if it's within focus, that's an interesting thing. That maybe that's a way of reading Rashi. What Dov is suggesting is not that you can't see further, but that it's focused on a point that's 2,000 amot away. So that if that thing is within focus, then you know that it's 2,000 amot. Maybe that's a way of reading Rashi. Okay, so it was some type of a device. So now the Gemara goes on.
So it was a laser.
A laser pointer, right? So now the Gemara goes on. It says, okay, if you want to know the depth of a valley, maybe shroferes, so you bring the same device, or maybe and you look in it. Again, assuming you have it, adjusted, calibrated. Thank you, for 2,000 amot based on measurements you've done on flat ground, and you've actually measured. So now you use that same angle, that same calibration, and you can figure out what the length is at the depth of the valley. Or the other way, or the other way is that, well, probably you do it the reverse. First, you get it so that it's measuring a particular point in the depth of the valley. Then you use that same calibration, and you see how far you get on flat land, and you can see how deep the valley is. So, however this device works, you can also use it for things that otherwise you couldn't measure, like ocean or the depth of a valley, based on measurements you've done on dry land. Now, let's say you want to see how high a palm tree is. So, presumably you could do the same, but it has even a better example. They have these things for measuring the room, these like laser pointers that they like bounce off the walls or whatever. Apparently they're like very inaccurate. So yeah, that's what I've read stuff on that. Anyway, but here, so it has a better way of figuring out the height of a palm tree. How is this? Moded komato v'tzilo. You measure your height and then the length of your shadow. V'tzel komato, and then you measure the length of the shadow of the palm tree on the same day, standing in the same position. And therefore it's proportional, right? V'yeda kama gofer shel dekel, and you'll know how high the palm tree is. Everybody understand that logic, right? I don't. You what? Yeah, I mean, if this is you, and this is the palm tree, right? And so if your shadow is, let's say, twice as long as you are, so then you measure the shadow of the palm tree and you divide by 2. If your shadow is 1.5, then you divide by 1.5. Or your shadow is half your length, you multiply by 2. So that actually makes a lot of sense. Okay, now I don't know where this is coming from because this is not exactly about measurements, but okay. But it's about shadows. You don't want animals to be particularly evil animals, meaning like poisonous animals or biting animals or whatever, to be resting in the shade of a tombstone. Apparently, you want to go visit the grave, and you don't want scorpions and whatever things to sort of be around there. So what do? No, it's you stick a stick into the ground when it's 10 a.m., 4 hours into the day, and you see where the shade goes, because apparently that's when it starts getting warm at 10 o'clock. And that's where all the animals will come to hide, where it's shady at that time. So you see where the shade is cast at 10 o'clock. And mashpia v'oleh, mashpia v'yored, and therefore what you do is you actually build a mound so that it doesn't actually cast a shade, right? If if at 4 o'clock this thing is casting its shade, to the east, and its shade hits over here as the end of the shade, I'd make a mound like this, so there's no area that's shaded, in that space at 10 o'clock. And Rashi says, once they're not finding shade at 10 o'clock, they're not going to bother to go there during the rest of the day either. I don't know. Anyway, what? They'll find another spot, and they'll camp out there. Right, exactly. So, okay. Nechemia braid Reb Chaniloi. Now that was the end of the Brighton. Now Nechemia, the son of Reb Chaniloi, Mashachte Shmata. He got very involved in his learning. So literally, it means his study, his sugya drew him away. So he was so head in the clouds that he was walking. He didn't know where he was walking. And he walked outside of the tchum. And now he can't get back into the city. So Amarle Rav Chizda Rav Nachman. So Rav Chizda said to Rav Nachman, Nechemia Talmidecha, Nechemia, your student, Shari B'tzar, is dwelling in discomfort. He's out there and he's stuck. Amarlo, so Rav Nachman said to Rav Chizda, Asilo Mechitza Shebnei Adam. Here's how we're going to solve it. Make a wall of people, v'ikanes, and let them enter into the wall of people. Which means basically, and this is important, ties into what we said yesterday. According to the position of Rav, who rules like Rav Gamliel in the Mishnah, even if you went outside the tchum, if within your 4 amot you can go to an enclosed space, you can walk the entire enclosed space. So how are they going to go into enclosed space? I mean, he's out there in the middle of the thing. Get 10 people together, surround him, make a big circle around him, and that's an enclosed space. And then what?
Haven't they gone Chusutkum to get to him?
Yeah, that's a good question. Presumably, Rashi says all of them will assume have made some type of an Eruv or something, which is a little bit
couldn't have
funny.
gone too far.
What?
I can imagine they started closer.
They started closer. Their houses are more right. Their houses are more at the edge of this.
Right,
You know.
couldn't have gone too far.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So now, so that's the answer. Right. You'd have to say that they either made an Eruv or that they started closer to that spot. So that's a solution. So, by the way, that's important because it basically is that we rule like Rabbi Gamliel, which we discussed is very significant, which we discussed.
Right? You're talking about that they're surrounding him and they make a corridor for him so he can come back in.
Right.
Surrounding him and then
they're constantly moving. So, right. So the Gemara. So let's take a look because that ties into the next line of Gemara. So Gemara says like this: Yosef Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak achui de Rava. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was sitting behind Rava. Yosef Rava came to Rav Nachman. And Rava was in front of Rav Nachman when this discussion between Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda were going on. Amoi Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak l'Rava, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who was the third back there, said to Rava, "My kami bayalei Rav Chisda. What's bothering Rav Chisda? Meaning, why did Rav Chisda need this answer from Rav Nachman? Why wasn't this self-evident? Rav Chisda told him that Rav Nachman Nechemia is in trouble, and Rav Nachman gave him this solution. So he wanted to know, what's bothering Rav Chisda? Who knows? Maybe Rav Chisda didn't think of the solution, but somehow he understood that there was some potential problem with this solution. What's the potential problem that Rav Chisda is having? And if you say that there are enough people to get him, back within the 2,000 amot, that's the case. And the question is, do we rule like Rabbi Gamliel or not? Do we say that you can, if your 4 amot gets you within an enclosed space, you can go the entire enclosed space? And if that enclosed space gets you back within your 2,000 amot, then once you get back in, right, you're safe. Do we say that? Or do we say, but the lo malu gavri askinan, that no. Certainly, Rav Chisda assumed you can rule like Rabbi Gamliel. If you can get into that enclosed space, you're fine. But the problem is, he maybe couldn't get into that enclosed space. Why not? Because there weren't enough people. And the question is, halach Rebbe Eliezer or halach Rebbe Eliezer? Do we rule like Rebbe Eliezer or not? Now, what's this Rebbe Eliezer? So this ties in to a question some people were asking yesterday. What happens if, here's your 2,000 amot. We say once you step out, you're limited to 4 amot. But what happens, but says Rebbe Eliezer says 2 following things. Number 1, he says your 4 amot are not 4 amot in every direction. They're 2 amot in each direction. Okay, you're in the center of the 4 amot. But that's a chumrah. But the kula is, if after you step out, you're within 2 amot of the city, your 4 amot overlap you're the 2,000 amot, then you're still within the 2,000 amot. Okay, so you actually get not 2,000 amot, but you get 2,002, according to Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim disagree. They say once you're 1 step out, even if your 4 amot overlap, it doesn't matter. You've gone over the line. Okay, now, so that the question is, maybe the case is that we don't have enough people to bring him. Oh, I should have brought the pens. Anyway, but here's the case, right? Here is your 2,000 amot. It ends here. You can make a corridor of people like this from the end of the 2,000 amot to where he's standing. But even that corridor, okay, only doesn't get you to the guy. It gets you within 2 amot of the guy. So the question is, certainly we can use those people. Certainly, if you could get into the enclosed space, you're okay. But the point is that you can't get to the guy. You could only get to, or I'm sorry, you can only get to within 2 amot of the guy, and doesn't have enough people. Now the question is, and this is Dove's question: who needs enough people? You just make a circle around the guy, and you just keep on moving. Right? So you make successive, spaces. So Tosfos asks that question, and we're going to see at the end of this discussion that the people who are making the wall around him have to be somewhat oblivious. Why? We'll see later, okay? But it's a good question. Who needs it to be one big extension? Why don't you do multiple, just move with a circle? But that's the Gemara's question. Why was there an issue here? Of course this is obvious. Maybe the question is, do we rule like Rabbi Gamliel? Or maybe the question is, what happens if you can't get all the way to the guys? Let's take a look. So it says like this. Let me just take 20. Okay. Right. So it says like this. Right. So Rashi says, by the way, it's not that. Right. Rashi says it's not that you would extend this and it would be within 2 amot of the guy, but it would be the opposite. You would sort of get this around the guy, and that even with same basic point. But even though you've got this wall and it's around the sky, he would only get to within 2 amot of the city. Okay, so let's take a look. So it says like this: it must be the issue is that you don't have enough guys. Why must that be the issue? Because if we assume you do have enough guys, what would be the question whether you rule like Rabbi Gamliel or not? Rav says we rule like Rabbi Gamliel in Dir V'Sor and Sfina, and therefore, and why is it obvious here that we're going according to Rav? 1 minute.
Everybody agreed about the Sfina.
Yeah, but this wasn't the Sfina case. This was the Dir V'Sor. You didn't start Shabbos within that space. Yeah, not clear why the Gemara is assuming necessarily that this would be going according to Rav, but okay. It must be that there were not enough people, so yes, they could get him into their band of people, but the people themselves couldn't necessarily reach all the way back to the 2,000 amot. They could only get within the 2,000 amot, and the question, only within 2 amot of that 2,000, of the space outside the 2,000, and the question is, do we go like Rabbi Eliezer? Dikanami, the Kamalei Yikanes. Actually, that's you can see that from the words he used, because he said, surround him with people and let him enter in. Ma Yikanes. What does it mean? Let him enter in. La below mechitza. It must mean enter, meaning enter from that band of people into the 2,000 amot. So presumably he leaves the enclosure of people, and he enters into the tchum. So there's actually a gap, because he used the phrase vikanes. Of course, vikanes could mean just, that band of people takes him into the 2,000 amot, but somehow it's understanding, again, if you've got him here, right, and you've got this band of people gets him within the 2, and then let him leave that circle of people and enter into the 2,000 amot, so that there's that
because he
gap.
gets those 2 amot
Because those 2 amot are like Rabbi Eliezer, and that is the issue.
Never need to go to the bathroom once he has to do that.
You could have done that too. Okay, so now let's see what the Gemara says. Again, it's not clear to me why it assumes that we go necessarily like Rav, but anyway, okay. So it says like this. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak asked Rava in terms of this whole solution. Is the solution of surrounding with people necessarily worked? So it says like this. Nafal dofna lo yamid ba'adam behema v'kelim. Now we're going to get another problem, which the Gemara didn't even think was an issue, which is, can you use people? 2 questions. Can you use people as a wall, and can you make a wall on Shabbos or Yontif? Are you allowed to make a wall on Shabbos or Yontif out of people? Maybe that's like a problem of building. So let's take a look. Here's a breita. If a wall of your sukkah fell down, nafal dofna lo yamid ba'adam behema v'kelim. You cannot, rebuild that wall of your sukkah on Sukkot, on Yontif itself. And not only obviously you cannot rebuild it like with construction material. You can't even make a person stand there, or get an animal to stand there, or pile up vessels to serve as the wall, even a very temporary wall.
Even if your wall was originally an animal, which you're allowed to do for sukkah?
Yes, but you can't do it on Yontif. You can't build a wall on Yontif. Okay, and don't sort of upturn the bed and use the bed frame and spread a blanket over the bed to make that into a wall. That's like making a tent, like building, even though it's not the roof of the tent, it's the wall of the tent. You cannot make a wall on Yontif, even if it's only temporary. Even clearly, by the way you're doing it, it's only temporary. And you certainly couldn't do it on Shabbos. So how can you do this? Very nice, you've solved the problem. Yeah, but by using people to make a wall, you've made a wall on Shabbos. So how are you allowed to do it? So Amarle, Atamartali, Meha, you want to show me from this that you're not allowed. I'll show you from this following brayta that you are allowed. What does the brayta say? You can use your friend as a wall for a sukkah. In order that you should eat and drink and sleep in the sukkah. You can use a person to serve as a wall. Or let's say it's not a sukkah's case. You can go ahead and stand up your bed frame and put a blanket on it and make essentially a shade, a wall to provide shade, so that a corpse does not sort of rot in the sun. And so it doesn't. So going to spoil food. So you are allowed to make a wall, a temporary wall on Shabbos and Yontiv. Okay, so I say it is allowed. So fine. So now we have a contradiction of Breitas. So what's the story there? Maybe it's a machlokas Tanayim. Maybe there's some other way of reconciling it. Kashi and Hadadi, they contradict one another. Lo kasha, it's not difficult. Ha Rabbi Eliezer, ha Rabbanan. It's a debate of Rabbi Eliezer Rabbanan. Not the Rabbi Eliezer who quoted before about the 2 amot, but a different Rabbi Eliezer than the Rabbanan did. Nan, we taught in the Mishnah. P'ka kachalon. You've got a stopper of a window. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Now Rabbi Eliezer says, if it is, this window stopper, instead of a shade, is tied to, it is suspended from the ground by a string, and it's tied to the wall. So clearly it's like a part of the wall, like a door, We don't say closing your door is adding to the wall, because it's all part of the same contraption. It's all connected. So Rabbi Eliezer says, if you've got this window stopper that's all connected, it's basically like, like a type of like a shutter, okay? It's on a string and it's tied to the wall and it's suspended. So then you haven't added anything. Then it's allowed. If it's kashur v'talur, pokimbo v'imlav. But if it's not connected and suspended, a pokimbo, you can't use it because it's like you're adding to the wall. The chachamim say ben kach u'ben kach pokimbo. Either way, you can add to it. So it seems like there's a debate, but it seems like, what is this? When it's not tied to the wall, you are adding to the wall. Why is it allowed? Presumably because it's only temporary. So presumably the debate of the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer is, can you do a temporary wall on Shabbos? So that's the issue of, can you make a wall out of people for your sukkah, out of a bed frame for your sukkah? Can you make a temporary wall on Shabbos? So it's a debate of Tanayim.
Wait, did we have this before though?
Yes, in Shabbos.
I know. But did we also have there before? They didn't want to green channels in.
So that's what the Gemara is going to say. But right now we think that the debate is, can you make a temporary wall on Shabbos and Yontiv? So that's the debate of the Braisos, and that's the debate, and that's what the issue is around surrounding him with people. So the Gemara says, like Michael said, 1 minute. The Gemara says, "Va'itmar Allah." But what we said to explain this debate, Amar Rabbi Bar Chanan Rabbi Yochanan, Hakol modim sheinosim ala Rabbi Tchila b'Yontiv. Everybody agrees that to really make a temporary wall on Yontiv you cannot do. Ve'in tzarich lomar Shabbos, and certainly that's true on Shabbos. So what's the debate about the window stopper? Lo nech l'goel lahosif. There, the wall exists, and you're only making a temporary addition. Rabbi Eliezer Omer ein mosifim b'Yontiv ve'in tzarich lomar Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't even allow you to make a temporary addition on Yontiv, and certainly not on Shabbos. V'chachamim only mosifim b'Shabbos ve'in tzarich lomar b'Yontiv. V'chachamim say you can make, but that's a temporary addition. This is not an addition. This is an entire wall. So how are you allowed to do it? So we are still stuck. Ella, so how do you explain the Breita, and how do you explain the fact that you allowed us to do it? Ella, it says, where were we? Ella, Kasha, Hak Rabbi Meir, Hak Rabbi Yehuda. It's about the debate about whether you can or can't is between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Titania, we turn to Brisa. Asal behema dofen l'sukkah. Let's say you wanted to use, not on sukkahs, erev sukkahs. You wanted to use an animal as your wall for a sukkah. Rabbi Meir posts Rabbi Yehuda Masha. Rabbi Meir says you can't, and Rabbi Yehuda says you can. Either because Rabbi Meir is afraid the animal will wander off, or there's an intrinsic reason that if it's a live thing, if it's an animal, somehow it's for some categorical reason it can't be defined as a wall. But Rabbi Meir says it's not good. Okay, so what the Gemara is trying to answer, and this is like a really hard to understand what the Havamina is, as Rashi himself says, is that the reason you can make the wall out of the animal is because it halachically doesn't work as a wall. And that's why you can make it. It's going to Rabbi Meir. So you really didn't do anything. Of course, it says you make the animal so you can eat in the sukkah. So what do you mean? So anyway, but that's what the Gemara is trying to say. You can do it because it didn't work. So we're going like Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir the kapasil hasam. Rabbi Meir there says it's no good. Ama lo mechitzahi. It's not meaningful to have your animal stand there, right? It's not really a wall. It's just an animal. It doesn't even count as a wall. So therefore, hachas shari, he would allow it here. The lav midikav, you're not doing anything. Rabbi Yehuda the kamash hasam. Rabbi Yehuda says an animal's good. Ama mechitzahi, so you're doing something, and hacha asa here it's forbidden. So the Gemara says, "V'tispera." Does that make sense? That when it says you can use the animal, it's going according to Rabbi Meir. First of all, it says you can use the animal so you can eat in there. So obviously, it does not make it does not seem to work. But anyway, v'tispera, does that really make sense? Ema d'sham say Rabbi Meir behema. First of all, he only said it by behema. When we said you're allowed to do it, it was adam it also said adam v'kelim, people or vessels. So adam v'kelim mishamislei. When did you ever hear him say that you could do it by that it was a problem to use people. Now you might say if it's a problem to use a behemoth, it's a problem to use person. But how about vessels? Right? Of course, according to him, you can just pile up chairs and tables and whatever. So nobody would say that's not good for a wall. Number one. This two, and in addition, Rabbi Meir alib deman. First of all, you haven't really solved the problem. Because who is he going like? If he's going according to Rabbi Eliezer, lohosif nami aser. So you can't even add, meaning even if it is not a halachic wall, but you're still adding to the existing structure. Hold on, let me just check Rashi a second. 1 minute. Right. Right. 1 minute. Right. I'm sorry. So, yeah. Right. Okay. Fine. So it would be according to the Rabbanan, and so he must be saying. So you've said basically it's not a halachic wall according to Rabbi Meir. So fine. So it's not a halachic wall according to Rabbi Meir, but why does it make it allowed? So what are you going to call it? You're not going to call it something of significance. You'll call it like a temporary thing. So yeah, adding the fourth wall on Shabbat according to Rabbi Meir. Adding this wall made out of an animal for your sukkah according to Rabbi Meir. So Ella Alib Rabbanan. So fine, you'll say it's going according to the rabbis, but 1 minute. Eimadamri Rabbanan lahosif. So the Gemara is assuming here that even though it's not a halachic wall, right, as Rashi says, the pekak of the chalon is also not a halachic wall. Things aren't all of a sudden allowed just because they're not halachic, although we're actually going to say that in a minute. But anyway, so he says that would be like, so what do you want to say? You want to say that it's like just like adding the pekak of the chalon. It's no worse than adding the pekak of the chalon since it's not doing anything of halachic of significance. But fine. But according to the rabbis, that's adding the pekak. There's an existing structure. Here, there's not an existing structure. This is osa l'chatchila. So let's see. So we don't understand what's going on. Anyway, the whole answer of Rabbi was very bizarre because why would you do something if it was not doing any halachic purpose? So let's see. So the Gemara says Ela hava rabbanan. So rather, it's both according to the rabbis, that whether you can or can't add the fourth wall. Really? So whether you can or can't add a wall. How could it be according to the rabbis who say that it would count as a wall? So what's the issue? Here's the issue. V'kelim lo kasha. I'm sorry. How about v'kelim lo kasha? So what's the issue about whether you can use the vessels? One says you can, one says you can't. Habadofen shlishis, habadofen revius. It depends whether it's the third wall or the fourth wall. Dikanami diktani nofel dofna shmamina, and that can be inferred because it says its wall fell down. If you go back and look at the Breitos, look back on higher up where we quoted the Breitos, it said the following, right? It says going back to the top of the Summah, about 8 lines from the top, the first thing said nafel dofna, its wall. Lo yamid ba'adam behema v'kelim v'lo yiskof esamita lifosasadin. So its wall means a wall that's necessary for it halachically. That's what you're not allowed to do. And if you look at the next brayta where it says you are allowed to do it, it says Ose Adam es Chavera Dofen Kadei Sheyocho v'yishta v'yishem v'yiskof esamita. Right? So it doesn't say its wall; it says a wall, and it basically says that the difference here is whether can you make a wall or not on Shabbos or not. It depends on whether it is a halachic wall or not. And this is actually an important issue, which is there's two definitions of ohel. One definition, really the fundamental definition of ohel is a roof. Right, that's an ohel, a roof. And when we say you cannot make a temporary ohel l'chatchila on Shabbos, we mean you can't make a roof. So, for example, people aren't aware of this, but you can't take some chairs and spread a blanket over and make a little tent for kids to play under. That's making a roof on Shabbos, even though it's only completely temporary. That's ein osim ohel l'chatchila ohel aray l'chatchila b'Shabbos. A wall is not exactly an ohel, but this Gemara basically says, and another Gemara says the same thing, a wall constitutes an ohel when it is actually doing a halachic function. When it's halachically serving as a wall to define like a rishus, to define a part of a sukkah, to define a sort of a wall around me so that I can go in it within the tchum on Shabbos and so on, that is serving as some type of like a significant role, and therefore that's like making an oel lechatchila on Shabbos when it is a what do you call it? When it is a halachic wall. So therefore, says the Gemara, can you make another wall on your sukkah on Shabbos or Yantiv? Well, it's the rabbis that say you can make an oel arai. So making a wall is considered, they say you can mosif on an oel arai, but you can't make it lechatchila. So making it lechatchila would constitute if I made a halachic wall. So to make the third wall, I can't do. That's like I created something new on Shabbos, even though it's only temporary. Yeah, but you're not right. Why don't you say you're being mosif on the other two walls? But that's the point. You're not being mosif on the other two walls. You're making a wall that in itself is defined as a halachic wall. Okay, so that's what you can't do. What can you do is if there are three walls, you can make the fourth, because then you're just being mosif on what exists. And even if you're not being mosif, even if you're just making this wall stam out in the middle of nowhere, you're, for example, allowed to, like it says, you're allowed to make a wall to protect the mace that it's shaded from the stuff. It's not adding on any existing structure. As long as it's not a halachic wall, you're allowed to do it. So the third wall is no good. That's making something new. A fourth wall, or a separate wall, which you don't need four walls for sukkah, or stam, a wall out in the middle of nowhere, which is just there to provide shade, that's not considered to be making an oel arai on Shabbos. It's not considered to be doing anything.
So in this case of the people, so although it is serving a halachic purpose for him to be in a tchum.
So that's what the most question is going to be. So how do we use the people to surround him to do a halachic purpose? You haven't solved the problem. You've solved the contradiction of this price as whether it was allowed or not. But what you haven't solved is the issue about how can they surround him. Okay. So now it says like this. Adam kasha. We have a difficulty about people against people. Okay, so how come one brayta says you're allowed to use people and the other says you're not? Now, 1 minute. 1 minute. Right, so if you take a look, let's go back and look at the cases of the Breita. So the case was like this. Again, if you take a look at the Breita, the first one says, going back to the Yom Aleph, it says like this. Nafal dofna, the wall, meaning the third wall of the sukkah, lo yamid ba'al be'em v'kelim. Okay. Then it says, so the one that said you can't do it, all of the cases were to make the third wall of the sukkah. So that's why that Breita, everything is no good, right? Because you can't make the third wall of the sukkah. Okay? Now, but the next one says, Osa Adam is chaver dofen kidei sheyocha v'yishta v'yishan v'yiskov samita v'yifras alasadin kidei shelo tipul chamal mis hala ochlim. So we have the case about protecting the mace and protecting the food. That's okay. It's not a halachic wall. But why does it say that you can use your friend kidei sheyocha v'yishta v'yishan, that you can sleep if you need him to make it a good sukkah? So he's doing a halachic wall. So we have one of these cases still says you can use a person to be the halachic wall in the sukkah. You see, everybody's got that? One Breita says everything is no good. That's when it was the third wall. The other Breita says everything is good. That's when it wasn't the wall. But one of the cases of the Breita that says it's good was when your friend is serving as a halachic wall. So it says, Kidei sheyocha v'yishta v'yishan. No, those are the acts that you're allowed to, that you need a sukkah to do. So anyway, so the Gemara says, Adam kasha, you've solved everything. What's no good is to serve as the third wall. What is good is to do some non-halachic wall function. But why does it say that you can use your friend to serve as the third wall in one of the Breitas? So the Gemara says, Adam nami lo kasha. That's not difficult. Kan ledas, kan shalomi das. Whether is the person sort of aware that he is actually serving as the wall or not. If he's not aware, if he's just standing there, stand there. Oh, that's perfect. I want to see I want to see what you look like as you're standing there, right? So and that is not considered to be creating something, presumably because the whole issue here, I imagine, is that human beings are not objects. So the idea that you can use a person he's defined as a wall is a little bit like, is a little funny. Have you really made him a wall? He's really a person. He's not a thing, right? So I think that maybe that somehow is informing this issue, that if somehow he acknowledges that he's there to serve as a wall, then it's seen as something somehow like more significant of what you've done. If he himself is unaware, then you can't really say you've defined him as a wall. Of course, the problem is that you're still playing it both ways. He's enough of a wall that he allows you to eat in your sukkah.
Right.
He's not enough of a wall that's considered like, I made a wall on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So I'm allowed to sort of split the vote and do it both ways. But that's the halacha. You can use a person to even be a halachic wall as long as he's unaware.
So the
Gemara says,
to bring back the student.
so that's what the Gemara is about to say. So that's how we resolve the braitas. So one braita, everything is no good. That's when it's serving as a halachic wall. The third wall of the sukkah. One braita, everything is fine. That's when it's serving non-halachic functions. It's providing shade or whatever. It says you can use a person to be the third wall of a sukkah. So that tells us that if the person's unaware, it's allowed. So now the Gemara says, even if he's making a halachic wall. So now the Gemara says, "V'hadreb Nechemia breidu Reb Chanilai with das have." 1 minute, that case was that it said, it was with awareness. It said, go bring people out. So Gemara says, Shalomi das have. No, who says they were aware? Why don't you sort of say, hey guys, come, let's go visit. I hear, who was it that was stuck out there? I hear Hanania is out there. Let's go visit him, see how he's doing. And you all get around, hey, let's all, I hear he just got married recently. Let's all do a circle dance. What you do anyway. So it says it's Shalomi das. So the Gemara says, so this, by the way, is why Tosfos says you couldn't have done successive things because that would have made them aware. So the Gemara was said, Rav Chizda Mia l'das have, but Rav Chizda, who was coordinating the whole thing, he knew what was going on. So the Gemara says, Rav Chizda Shalomi minyan have. Fine, he was a part of the group that made the wall. He was just coordinating it. Very bizarre issue here about how they think they can actually arrange it. But halachically, it's quite significant. Because halachically, this becomes part of an idea that you can make a temporary wall on Shabbos, as long as it's not a halachic wall. You can't make a temporary ohel, but you can make a temporary wall. And there are cases of this, like, for example, one of the early references we have to the presence of a mechitza there's a Mordechai that says, when the women come to hear the drasha of the rabbi, you put up you're allowed to put up a mechitza for tznius, because, modesty is keeping the men and women separate, and it's not considered a halachic wall because it's just there for modesty purposes. It's not a halachic wall, meaning that it's defined as a class wall of 10 tefachim high in order to halachically define either a wall of an enclosure or to halachically to separate two reshuyot. This is just for privacy purposes, modesty purposes. So it's an interesting question. What do you mean when the women come here to hear the drasha? Where were they before that? So actually, in the time of the Rishonim, we see in other places that the women davened in a separate room from the men, maybe even in a separate building. But the rabbi doesn't want to give the drasha twice, so you have the women all come in, but then they have to put up a mechitza. So it's actually interesting. I should say that there's an interesting halachic implication about this, about the mechitza, because there's debates about what the function of a mechitza is, in a shul. So if it's about sort of serving some practical purpose so that one side can't see the other side or interact with the other side, then it's not halachic in the sense that it's not defined as your classic 10 tefach wall, whose purpose is to define an enclosure or to formally separate two reshuyot. But there is an opinion, Rav Henkin says, quotes his father, that it says no, that actually the mechitza's fundamental role is to halachically define them as two separate reshuyot, and therefore, in principle, 10 tefachim could be enough. And there are some shuls that actually, still some OU shuls that are left that still have mechitzas that are only 10 tefachim high, which is basically 30 inches, maybe 3 feet or so on. So Rav Moshe, very strongly disagrees with this. But Rav Henkin brings down that, according to his grandfather, Rav Yosef Eliyahu Henkin, that really it's fundamentally there is to just designate them as separate places, not to practically, make it obstruct interaction. So therefore 10 tefachim is enough. By the way, it's a chumrah also, because he says that if, let's say, the mechitza starts more than 3 tefachim off the ground, but goes very high, is it good? So if it's halachically has to be a wall, it has to be within 3 tefachim of the ground. So in one of his tshuvot, he actually is criticizing a certain kibbutz he was at, that their mechitza started more than 3 tefachim. It was like a screen that started with, whatever, some type of a fabric that started 3 tefachim off the ground. Anyway, so according to that approach, you couldn't make it on Shabbos, because then it's actually serving as a halachic mechitza, as defining a halachic wall. So I was once at a bar mitzvah where they were what?
What if the Mechitza didn't know it was serving as a wall?
Yeah, right. The Mechitza didn't know, so that only works for people. So I was once at a bar mitzvah where they had everything set up outside. It was Shabbos, and then it was like bad weather, so they moved it all indoors, and they needed to ad hoc. It wasn't at a show; it was a private home. They needed to ad hoc set up a Mechitza, so they were doing something that was only 10 tefachim. I said, if it's only 10 tefachim, you can't do it on Shabbos. You have to make it higher. You have to rule that that the function of the mechitza is not halachic wall. You have to make it bigger so you're allowed to do it on Shabbos. Anyway, all right. So now, but that is the halacha about the issue about making a halachic wall. Okay. So now the Gemara ends this whole discussion with about using a wall out of people. So it says, Hanu b'nei ganana, people of gardeners, the ilu maya b'mechitza shel b'nei adam, that they use this mechitza to bring water, presumably from, I don't know, there was a well out in the garden into the house on Shabbos.
More than outside the home?
Well, or maybe that was just an issue of Rishus HaYachid, right? Once you're using people for a wall, you could also use it to make a space into Rishus HaYachid. So, Nagdinu Shmuel gave them lashes. Amar Imamu Shalomidas, Yomalidas, if they allowed it by people, right, that was only if the people weren't aware. If they're aware, it's like making a wall on Shabbos. Hanu Ziki, the Havishadyan Bristika, Beristika de Mechuza. So there were various flasks that were flasks that were thrown in the streets of Mechuza. Bahadidasi Ravi Mipirke, when Rava was going out of the Beis Medrash, and of course he was surrounded with all of his students, like that classic painting of like Plato and Socrates, surrounded by the students or whatever. So that's like the image. So he's going out of the Beis Medrash and he's surrounded by students, and they're a circle around him. So Alinu Nialai. So they brought him into him, meaning so they used the fact that he was surrounded as students. So somebody as they were traveling, picked up the flasks and walked with the students and was surrounded, and the students were unaware. So that was fine. L'shab Sachrisi, the next Shabbos, by Alinu, they wanted to use the same trick. V'asalu, he said, you're not allowed to. Davilu kiladas. V'asar, now everybody knows the trick, so now it's forbidden. Okay. Levi Ilule Tivna, for Levi they used surrounding of people to bring in straw. Zeiri Aspasta, for Zeiri it was Aspasta, which was, some other type of fodder. Rishim Brachia Maya, and for Rishim Brachim water, and it doesn't, of course, explain, again, the issue of how they did it with people being unaware. So this whole idea that you can use people if they're unaware, it's hard to imagine how many cases you have of this. But
you can't really know what's in somebody else's mind. Are they aware?
Say, hey guys, let's all make a wall of people so we can bring this water out from the middle of the street. Then they're aware. I mean, it's not a question of having kavanah. It's not a question of saying hini muchad mezuman. It's being aware. If you've told them and they were listening, they're aware. So. So that's the issue about people. Now I do want to just make a second and go back to talk about the fact of what I said that we do paskin though. This whole issue was saying you can make a wall around him on Shabbos, so assuming you can, out of people or whatever, then he certainly can go into it and go in that whole space. And we paskin like Rabbi Gamliel, even by the dia v'sohar, that even if somebody's outside the tchum, if they can get within their 4 amot if they can get surrounded by a space, then they can, by walls, then they can travel the whole space. And that, as I said, is very relevant because if you're on a plane and somehow you got stuck with takeoff or landing, and you land on Shabbos, so even if you've gone outside of the tchum, if they don't make you go down on the tarmac, which sometimes they do, but if they've got, what's the tube called, whatever it is,
jetway.
If they got that jetway, so then basically you go straight within a surrounded space, and you're okay. So, and the other point I should just mention, I mentioned this yesterday as well, but just to lach l'maisa, so I want to read it, is about how we rule in terms of tchumim l'mala me'asara, because a lot of those cases, you're also basically, if you're up in the air, you're l'mala me'asara. And then the only issue that was raised is when you land, and then from the point you land till it does its, what's it called, taxiing, right? Then maybe you've gone already 2,000 amot. Again, and I have to look into whether when you actually do land, are you considered on the ground yet? Because you're still clearly l'mala me'asara, but you've got a base of more than 4 tefachim tefachim, and it is all connected to the ground. So is that like is that still like the Gemara's case of the pole or not? I have to check that. But anyway. But here it says, just to read you the Shulchan Aruch, this is Siman Taf Daled, Hamahalik chutz l'tchum l'mala me'asar tefachim, kagon shekafetz al gabi amudim shekvorim yud, ve'ein b'kol echad mehem arba al arba tefachim. So you basically jump from one pole to the next, and none of them are 4 by 4 tefachim. Then it says, Harei zeh safek im yesh tchumim l'mala me'asar imla. We don't know if there's considered tchumim above 10. Umash yeh b'durabbanan yes fekel hakel. So since it's rabbinic, it's all going to be the kula, and tchumim are Rabbanan, and the Ramah basically says that even if it's, and now the question is that how about the fact that there's some opinions that when it's not just 2,000 amot, which is 1 meal, but when it's actually 12 meal, that's deoraisa. So the Shulchan Aruch says, "V'hoel ve'ein b'yam b'naharis isur tchumin deoraisa l'divrei hakol." Basically, even if we say 12 meal is deoraisa by tchumim, that's only on the ground. In the air or in the ocean or whatever, everybody agrees that tchumim is not deoraisa. So it's always going to be a rabbinic question if you're lamala me'asara, and since it's a debate, we're always going to go l'kula. So basically, the effective psak is ain't tchumim lamala me'asara. So he says, if you come in on a boat on Shabbos and you're higher than 10 tefachim off of the base, off of the ocean floor, assuming you're not going in a very shallow, and you got into the port, like our case in the Mishnah, if you were always above 10, you never got to within 10, yored! And as soon as you hit the ground, that's where your 2,000 amot start. Okay, and therefore you can disembark on Shabbos. So he's saying that extremely relevant, both the psak of Rabbi Gamliel by Dir v'Sohar and this idea of Ein Tchum L'Mala Me'asara of getting off of a plane that actually landed on Shabbos. Okay,
On a
cruise ship also, exactly.
Wherever it is.
Yep, exactly. All right, let's now start the next Mishnah. Misha Yotza Bershus. Now, that was that it was against your will. You had no choice, but, the non-Jews, something forced you out there. There we say you only have 4 amot from whence you leave. Okay, if you're not in one of these cases about surrounded by walls. But let's say you actually left and you were allowed to go chutz l'tchum. What's the case? Interestingly, it doesn't say here. It says in Rosh Hashanah, Masechus Rosh Hashanah, it says what are the cases you're allowed to leave? Because there it spoke about leaving the tchum in order to give testimony on the new month. And then it spoke about other cases like a midwife going to help a woman give birth, helping somebody that's in danger of life. When you're going to do a mitzvah, not just you're doing it because like you're forced. Somebody, is dragged you out, but you're going to do a mitzvah, then you have 2,000 amot from wherever you wind up. You get to the next city, you help this woman give birth, then you have 2,000 amot from your new place.
Even if you didn't do an Eiruvin before.
Yeah, right. Even though you went outside of the tchum. Now, so the Mishnah, somehow it's fascinating. The Mishnah assumes you know that if you go out Rishus, you have 2,000 amot, but now it deals with the following scenario. You went out Rishus, the Amruluk for Nasa Masa, and they said, oh, your services are no longer needed. We found another midwife. She already gave birth. Let's use that example. Okay, so there you are. And it wound up that, you don't need to continue going. You're no longer involved in a mitzvah. And so how much are you stuck? So Yeshua Payim Amal Kol Ruach. So therefore, wherever you found out that you're no longer needed, you have 2,000 amot. You don't get to go to the city and have 2,000 amot from the city. So you still might be a little stuck. Okay, this might be a bad policy decision.
Hatzalah deals with this all the time.
I'm sure.
Hatzalah, they go somewhere
right.
They're shut. And then the question is,
right, now that's also a question about Hitir Sofan Mishum Tchilasan and letting people go back or they wouldn't go, and it's doctors, and we'll get to that at the end of the Mishnah, but this is just giving you 2,000 amot, which is not such a good policy, because if you could be stuck in the middle of the road with 2,000 amot, you're not in one city, you're not in the next city. So it's nice to give you 2,000 amot, but it's still a little problem being stuck there. Okay. Im haya b'toch ha-tchum ki'ilu lo yatsa. But if you're still within the tchum, it's like you didn't leave, which is obvious. You didn't leave, you're in the tchum. So the Gemara will discuss what that means. Kol ha-yotzim l'hatzi o chozim l'imkoman. And by the way, when you actually went out, you can go back. Now we say they couldn't, so maybe it means that you actually succeeded in doing the person. It's not like you were no longer needed. Right, this last line does not seem exactly to connect, because this seems like you can always go back, and our Mishnah says you can't, but the difference could be that in our Mishnah, it turned out that you weren't needed. Okay, but maybe if you were needed, you can go back. We'll see about that in the Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara first wants to understand what this. So the last two parts of the mission don't seem to make sense. So what does it mean? Im haya b'toch hatchum kilu lo yatsa. If you were within the tchum, it's like you didn't go out. Of course, it's like you didn't go out if you didn't go out. Amar Rabba hachi kamar. This is what it means. Im haya b'toch hatchum shelo kilu lo yatsa mitoch beito. Dummy. If you're within your tchum, it's like you did not go outside of your house. Which means what? Which means that let's say your house is here. You went 1,000 amot, okay? And then they say you have 2,000, and then you found out. They say you have 2,000 in every direction. So, do I have 2,000 now? I can go another 2,000 in this direction? Or do I go back to being in my house? So he says, no, if you're basically within the tchum of your house, you don't get a new 2,000 amot, you go back to where you started Shabbos. Okay, so the Gemara says, a pshita, obviously. No, I might have thought, hova akar. Once you uprooted yourself. So once you sort of, we re-gave you the 2,000 amot, even though you never left your original 2,000 amot, we gave you a new one. Kamash malan, we don't say that. This is what it means. So this is a much more or bigger chiddush. Here's your house. Okay, here is here's where you are. I guess I don't know how to. Anyway, here's where you are. Your house was over here. I'm your house. This is your 2,000 amot. You find yourself out here when you found out your services are not needed. From where you are, your 2,000 amot back overlap your 2,000 amot from your house. Okay? So since your 2,000 amot from where you are overlap your original tchum, you're allowed to go all the way back to your house. We normally wouldn't allow that because then you would always wind up having like 4,000 amot or whatever. But in this case, we see that basically this is a special case where you have two places where your tchum is defined. Your tchum is defined where you started Shabbos, that's your 2,000 amot, and you got a new tchum of where you wound up, a 2,000 amot. If those two tchumim overlap, you're allowed to go back home. Okay. Now, by the way, I should say that Rashi says in one passage, Rashi has two reads of this Gemara, but in one read, according to this, not only are you allowed to go back home, you really have two tchumim. You are allowed to go from your house 2,000 amot in that direction, and from where you are 2,000 amot in that direction, and all the way back to your house. Okay, you really get your new tchum and your old tchum, and they overlap, and they come one big tchum of almost 8,000 amot. That's what Rashi says. 1 minute, let's take a look, because we're running out of time. I just want to read one example of the Gemara. Let's do 1 more minute. What are they debating? Marsavar have lost tchumim milsahi. One says if one gets absorbed in the other, overlaps, it's significant, and therefore it gets you back to your house, or maybe even gives you both. It becomes one big tchum. Marsavar lav milsahi. No, it would not do it. So once you left your 2,000 amot, you really would be stuck. And it's only, the point is just like you don't get a new one. Okay, so now the Gemara says, let's just read one example of this. Amalei Abai l'Rabba. So Abai said to Rabbi, "Atlo tispara davlos tchumim milsahi." You must agree to me that this actually makes sense. Why? Uma ilu shavat b'me'ara. If you basically started Shabbos in a cave, shabatocho arbat alafim. If you look at the picture in Rashi, right? So at the bottom of the cave, it's 4,000 4,000. Did I say tfachim? Arba alafim. It's 4,000 amot wide, and at the top, it's less than 4,000 amot wide.
4,000 amot, or you mean 4 amot?
No, I meant 4,000. Couldn't you go the whole thing and outside of it 2,000 amot? So what does that mean? I'll just draw you this one case, so we don't have to do it again tomorrow. And of course, we don't have a thing. But okay, I'll try to do it again with 3-dimensional. No. I'll do it like this. Okay, here, I'll do it 3-dimensional. Okay, here's your cave. You can go down into the cave on this side. Right? You can go down into the cave, right, on this side or on this side. Okay, on the bottom is 4,000 amot. Now, if you started, let's say you're down here, you go out of the cave and you come out on this side. Okay, so you're given 2,000 amot in this direction. Okay, if you were to come out on this side, you'd be given 2,000 amot in that direction. Okay, now, so therefore, but practically, right, you can, if you started here, right, you would be able to, or stood on the bottom of the cave, you'd be able to go 2,000 amot this direction, 2,000 amot this direction, the whole length here, all right, even though in the end you're going more than 4,000 amot, because ultimately you're at the bottom of the cave, and that overlaps, creates, if you started at the openings, right, if you started here, if you literally started Shabbos here, you'd only have 2,000 amot this way. If you started Shabbos here, you'd have 2,000 amot.
Anyway.
What?
I mean,
but this way, you get, because you started at the bottom of the cave, and the bottom of the cave is all surrounded by walls, it's all one space, right, essentially. It's all one space. So therefore, it gives you, all of this is considered one space, and it gives you 2,000 amot in each direction. But looked from above the ground, you have more than 2,000 amot, because you've got 2,000 amot, the entire top of the cave, and another 2,000 amot. So it sees this as this tchum, from when you go here, overlaps with this tchum, but because they're sort of brought together, because at the base of the cave it's all one, right? Because they're brought together, it allows you to have both of the tchumim. Now, it's not a very good comparison at all, which is why I wanted to get done with this today, and we'll just see the answer of the Gemara. The Gemara's answer is, Amar lei, so he said back to him, V'lo shani l'cha ben heicha de shavas ba'avri mechitzas mibod yom leheich de lo shavas ba'avri mechitzas mibod yom. He says, what's the difference? How can you compare it? There, if you're at the bottom of the cave, you're in a place surrounded by walls. So, of course, the fact that where you exit, okay, doesn't matter. You were in the cave, and you get 2,000 amot from wherever you're going to exit the cave in either direction. But that's because it was all one space. Here, you're at your home, and you left, and just because they overlap does not necessarily mean you're going to get both. In the case of the cave, it wasn't that the two openings overlapped. It was that where you were at the bottom was surrounded by mechitzos and is all considered to be essentially one space. So we're going to continue tomorrow with this issue of if the two your old tchum and your new tchum overlap, do you actually get both of the tchumim combined? Okay.